So it's been a few days since 24-hour burn-in test that someone didn't like. Probably because they were thinking it would be something other than action-packed and rambling. So I've got a screen cap here. This was after the computer was sitting idle for somewhere between 7 and 9 hours overnight. A graphics card was sitting around 40C. OBS wasn't recording. And just before firing this up with OBS, maybe steady state. So the chipset's sitting at 42C. The VRM on the motherboard sitting at 38C. 42C, 38C. Keep getting these numbers mixed up. And we're sitting about the same. The CPU's kind of cycling between 37.8 and 39C with stuff going. So overall, to save people the time, no, there's no temperature change. Maybe the noise from the card is reduced slightly, yet again, without a dB meter to prove it, yeah, no change. So go watch another video or whatever, because the rest of this is just going to be incredibly boring. Quick safety injection. If you're going to be dremeling metal, you gotta be like, especially with grinding wheels, you gotta be aware that the heat's gonna travel through the metal. So yeah, we can learn from some of my former experiments with machining weird things. And I'm not exactly sure where it was. Maybe it was these corners here. I had vice gripped this to a piece of particle board because I didn't want to mess up the railings on my porch. And then I went to town with the grinding wheel, just rounding up some of the corners. And the heat kind of traveled down and started singeing the board. So what I have here is this is just an electrical box. It's got 2 punch outs on each side that you can put like a wire grommet on, and I picked up like a handful of these things for less than $1 each to stuff RFI filters in for like amateur radio antenna stuff. So obviously I got an empty metal box here. I've got this clipped on here, and yes, I did start dremeling right into the top of this because I didn't care. But that was eating up the Dremel wheel real fast. So, yeah, I'm cutting this edge right here, and I've got it braced right there. And this is not directly on this board. This board was, I found an oak step scrap at a hardware store, and I asked them to cut it up to the width of my Mackie Studio speakers to make like little platforms to put them on, and this was the scrap left over from that. And I really don't care what these things look like because they're going to be like stuffed into a wall and under the floor and places that nobody's going to be looking at scuff marks on them for antenna stuff. So yeah, I mean, and in fact, this box has been sitting in my closet for I think a couple of years now unused. So it got a new home. Another possibility, assuming it's not really flimsy metal, because some power supplies do have really flimsy metal, got a power supply. So it's just the metal case. Usually they're like 2 pieces, and there's maybe at most 6 screws that hold the one half of the shell onto the other half of the shell. You don't want any plastic, you don't want any flammable or anything in that metal box, and then you can kind of clamp what you're dremeling to that, and that way the metal box is dissipating the heat instead of the desktop or whatever. And on that note, oh, that's the other folder. That right there is a piece of rubberized plastic that I'm guessing is to prevent this from buzzing against the back of that. That or it's to guide the air out the back of the case instead of being sucked right back into the fan. Either way, you want to remove that from this before you start dremeling. Because plastics and wood, they're flammable. So with that, back to the regular rambling. You don't win them all, do you? So, I had gotten the card, and I should probably go over here because this was the first day that I actually went outside and took some pictures of the thing. And I was looking at this really tight spot here. The fan shroud is about there, so half of this vent is covered up by the fan shroud, and the fan is like right there. So it's pointless to even bother trying to open that up because the air is going to come down to here before it goes anywhere. So from there down to about here is like exhaust on that vent, and then there's like a thing here that's holding these fins together. That there's not much you can do about that. You gotta have mechanical support on these things. And then you got an exhaust down here. The VRM blocking this, so all this airflow is coming through here. Only has two choices. It goes out the top of the card, or it goes down, smacks against the motherboard, and gets sucked right back in the fans. Because again, there was no opening down there for the air next to the motherboard to scoot out the back of the computer. And it's not like it can go through the VRM to get out here. So yeah, I was looking at that and thinking, you know, I might be able to do something about that. And unfortunately, I ran out of daylight before I finished doing that, so I just kind of cleaned up the burrs and I slapped it in the computer. And I got a whole bunch of erroneous numbers because we look at the temperatures here. This was not at 42C. This wasn't at 38. The CPU, well, it's working its way up to 36.8, not remotely there. And I had the door open, so the place was cooler. Hence the erroneous numbers. The next day, I went out and I had some fun with the Dremel. And you can't just Dremel and like slap the stuff into the computer. You gotta clean up the burrs. Because I think there's a good picture here to show that. You know, the size of that backplate versus those tiny little dots right there, or those ones there. We'll zoom way in. Those are like little solder balls that connect the chip to the circuit board. I think there's one over here, yeah. You don't want burrs getting under there, especially after you've ground it, because something about the heat causes those to get slightly magnetic, so they'll stick to stuff, especially solder that has tin in it. And you'll never get it out from under those chips. And you'll be dealing with a shorted out card, which just isn't cool. So you can't just Dremel and send. You really got to clean up the thing and get all the burrs out. And part of this was me taking pictures and zooming way in and going, oh, wait a minute, there's a burr right there. I got to go clean up that. And a couple of more burrs on the edges there. Eventually, I did get the thing all cleaned up and nice and pretty. But at the end of the day, we're looking at this little section here for airflow coming out of the card. And then there's like that space above the plugs. I did open this up here, so now the air goes through. It can work down this way and out the back of the computer. Although the suction of the fan is probably still circulating. I can probably put like some kind of a baffle or something here to disallow air going in here. Although, looking at the pictures after the fact, and think about what I was going to save this video, I noticed something else here about these fans. That looks like it's straight up and down. I have no idea what kind of a blade profile that is. That's just a triangle. Unless this fan spins backwards and is supposed to pull air the other way through the card, which doesn't make any sense, because prior to doing this mod, I could feel air. Like a linear jet of air coming out of this area here. After doing the mod, the velocity is slower, which means maybe if I had a dB meter, I could measure a lower hissing noise from this vent. But again, we're probably like splitting hairs of like half a C or something. Or half a, not a half a C, half a 0.1 C. So yeah, I mean, lost my train of thought there, but I did get this cleaned up. That's what it was. Burrs taken out, and got that into the computer after vacuuming it up a little bit. So there it is. I had forgotten there's like a plastic thing on the motherboard here covering the audio section. Funny thing about that, they isolated the ground for the audio section, and then they put an RGB strip right through the center of the audio section, which hypothetically, maybe possibly, is contaminating that whole isolated ground section with PWM signal from the LEDs. Brilliant. But anyway, yeah, there's only so far down it's worth cutting that. I kind of didn't want to, like, ruin the labels for the plugs or anything, which is why I stopped there instead of going down further. And then after the fact, I'm like, oh yeah, there's that plastic thing there. Some motherboards may not have that. And another thing I was kind of looking at is this side of the card over here has all kinds of air flow through. But the VRM is over on this side, which has all those restrictions on airflow. Yeah. So a couple of days ago, I was looking at the back plate and trying to figure out how do I cut bigger vents with a Dremel wheel that's like slightly over 2 centimeters in size. I think it's like 2.7 or 2.7, or yeah, 2.7? 2 point something, I think, is the diameter of the disc. And I guess the unofficial trick is you use the wheel on the big cuts until it gets a little bit smaller, and then you use like the leftover wheel to make some of the more tricky cuts that really require a smaller wheel. And you just kind of have to go with the flow on that. But yeah, I was looking for pictures of the card online, and I noticed that Google kept suggesting the 3060 Ti pics, And I'm looking at this backplate and saying, you know, that is pretty much what I wanted to do here. And initial thinking is, okay, so they pay for a die that punches these holes into the sheet metal, probably folds it at the same time in this massive machine. I just punch, send it. And then they paid for a second die to punch this up with less ventilation on it. Paying more money for, you know, I was thinking paying more money for less performance, but at the end of the day, I mean, the graphics card is pretty much sitting exactly where it was before I opened this up. But it is kind of funny. I mean, you would probably go and buy a burnt out 3060 Ti on eBay, grab the bracket, and put it on your 3060 12 gig. Because I'm pretty sure these are exactly the same plugs, and they're probably exactly in the same spots, because it really looks like the circuit board was the same one. And about that, I found 2 pictures online of this particular one. This one I'll leave a link in the doobly-doo. This person is just replacing paste. They didn't have any 2 or 3 millimeter pads to replace the pre-existing ones. And I'll leave another link in doobly-doo to a different one that actually labeled what was what and the dimensions of them so you could redo the pads. Nobody's taken the circuit board off the backplate, so I have no idea what's back there. None at all. But, you know, the tiny picture, I see phases missing here. And there's memory missing, and I'm pretty sure that's the TI version that uses all of that. So, yeah. It's an interesting little thing. I wasn't able to find a lot of information. And, yeah. We got 4 screws here, and I'm pretty sure at least 2 of these you can't get to unless you remove the cooler from the card. So removing the backplate is just a non-option. Likewise, the cooler, this screw here is sitting right above this plug, so there's no way to get the plastic off of the metal to get in there to clean it. And I had the same exact issue with the 1070 non-TI. There was no way to get the plastic off to be able to brush the dust off of the full length of the heatsink. So I just kind of dabbed the brush in through the fins, the fans, and kind of sent it. Which is why it looked so bad in that one picture. Because I wasn't going to dissect that thing just to clean it. But yeah, the back plate. Where was that picture? I kind of want to put thermal pads here, and maybe, what was it, here and here for the memory? Oh, especially there. I mean, there's no airflow over that on the other side to cool that as memory, and it's right up against the motherboard down here where the exhaust vent would be, so those memory chips are probably kind of on their own, aside from that cooler plate. I mean, there's vertical flow there, and there's kind of some here, but that's about the extent of it. So, why do I think the mod didn't work? Well, looking at this after the fact, and it kind of goes back to, you know, that's what it looked like before. And there was a little bit of a jet of air coming out there. And after the mod, I don't feel the jet anymore, but there is airflow. It's just slower, which means that there's a restriction somewhere else. And I suspect I can almost see that restriction, but I don't want to remove that. That was the other thing. Now, I kept looking at where do I cut this and where do I not cut it, because I didn't want to, like, totally remove the structural capacity of the thing. Yeah. This was a SATA controller card that I had diced up eons ago to allow air to flow over the card, and it wasn't for this, believe it or not. It was for air to get across the back of the 1050 Ti in the other computer to cool the VRM on that thing. As you can see here, there isn't much for airflow on this, and that's just a thermal sensor I jammed in the thing to get an idea of what was going on. But yeah, this isn't my first rodeo cutting up things, but that, you know, we're talking a couple of ounces of circuit board. And there's bolt holes holding it directly onto the bracket here. So I don't have to worry about the structural capacity of that, unlike, there's a good picture. These 4 screws are the only thing that hold this on. There's nothing along this edge down here, unlike other backplates. So I have to worry about the structural connection on that. So I can't just cut a giant hole on this. Hemmen and Han. There was another direction I was going here. With cutting holes and trying not to remove too much metal. But I guess that's also going to come back to bite me a little bit here. Because looking at this, the air comes through here, and there's this giant area here. It's, you know, it's that wide, or tall, but it's only about that. And somewhere around here I have a whole bunch of pictures of on the other computer because I was measuring things. And then just before recording this, I say, okay, what are the dimensions? Looking at that side profile pic, probably slide that up there. Slide that down there. Somewhere between there, and that's a notch on this, that's a notch there, yeah, somewhere around there on that 17. And somewhere between the back of this plug where that angle is and slightly further down. Call it about where that 19 is, 2 centimeters. You can see the end of the heatsink here. There's heat pipes in this area. So the air going through the heatsink is just that area there, about where the 9 is, between the 9 and the 8. There's caps on the end of the heat pipes up here, so they don't extend all the way to the end of 0. It's somewhere between 0 and 1, so call it roughly 8 centimeters. So this opening is roughly about 2 centimeters by 8 centimeters. Roughly. We're not going to go totally scientific numbers and whatnot, but you know, that's You know, 8 centimeters there, 2 centimeters of air flowing down through from the fan. Call it 16 centimeters square, 2 times 8. And then this opening between the plug and that obstruction there that's holding the heatsink together. I didn't measure that. I'm guessing it's half a centimeter or less. I think these plugs are like 0.4 or something ridiculously small like that. So half a centimeter, 8 centimeter, that's 4 centimeters. So you're trying to cram 16 centimeters of airflow through a 4 centimeter opening. That's not going to work. What are you doing? I wanted this one. So yeah, you got roughly, give or take, 16 square centimeters of airflow coming out here, and then it's got to go through like that tiny little gap there, and then up to where the vents are, and then even after the modification, there's some blockage here from the bolts and stuff holding these plugs on. So I think that restriction right there may be another thing. But I'm not sold on that. Because looking at this picture after, and this is like before any modifications, again, looking at those fans, I don't know what kind of profile that is. They don't seem to be able to go below 53%, and I don't think I've ever seen this go above 75. And at this point, I'm not even sure which way they're supposed to spin, because I mean, there it looks like it's an actual blade. But in the other picture, it really looked like that was just a flat. Yeah. Maybe these are regular blades and it is pushing it through. Looking at this picture, looking at the other one, I was like, because this one I can see, you know, this is completely blocked here. There's a slight angle right there, so some air can get out these two vents, but not much. And then down here is completely blocked off, which I opened up. But yeah, I mean, that's... Was there another picture in the other folder? Okay, that one looks... Alright, so maybe they are airfoil. Maybe that was the one I was looking at and saying, how much airflow is here? Again, you know, less than the height of a display port. Display port? Yeah, that's HDMI. Yeah, display port. Between the plug, that's not a lot for airflow. Plus, you get like the surface effect of when air is going over. When air is going over a surface, the closer you get to the surface, the slower it's going, because the air molecules right against the surface are like friction slowed down kind of thing, and then you get like friction in the airflow, and you have to get a distance away from that before you have the luminar or laminar or whatever you call it flow. So yeah, that's probably not great. The other thing that's really like, I'm kind of disappointed because I didn't think about it until after I started doing some of the testing. And I'm over here and I'm looking at this screen cap of erroneous numbers, because the room is cooler than the pre-test. There isn't a VRM temp here at any of this. So I have no recording of what those FETs were doing prior to the mod, which really sucks. Now, because all I did was cut some holes in this, I can just kind of tape over these holes and yeah, that was there. Tape over this, tape these across here, tape that up, and then see what the VRM temps are. And then take the tape off and see if the VRM temps change. But I'm going to have to go and grab some kind of external sensor thing, and there isn't going to be screen caps of that unless I take a photograph of the meter. Supposedly this motherboard has sensors that you can plug in somewhere. I don't even remember what, I mean, no, that's system 2. Temperature 2, what is that? No clue. And then there's the, one of those sensors that I used to monitor way back in the day is just kind of jammed between the top of the case and the radiator, moderating the exit air temperature. And the other one's kind of jammed underneath the VRM heatsink that I made, monitoring the temperature of that heatsink. But after about a month of watching what the temperatures were doing, I kind of figured out that this sensor here is reading the same as that other one. So it was kind of not worth... It's not even worth me going in and trying to pull the sensor out from underneath the heatsink. But those sensors... kind of like this. This is just a metal piece to mount it onto a heatsink. I grabbed this out of an old dead power supply, and I jammed the wires into my multimeter. I'm like, hey, it's a 10K sensor. It works. The ones that the motherboard came with, they have this giant black plastic thing over them, so I can't really slide them in to get like a good temperature. Yeah, the MOSFETs are there. Yeah, there's no way to get those big giant plastic round things under there to get the temperature of the FETs themselves. Oh. I mean, I looked online to see if Asus had like an equivalent to Afterburner, and the only thing they had to offer was like this. It takes over your entire computer, the motherboard, the graphics card, the hard drives. It's stuff that I've already kind of firmware told to be at a specific spot. You know, the fans, I know it says pump 5, but that's where the radiator fans are plugged in. That's set up in the BIOS. I don't need like a program that only runs in Windows telling the fans what to do. Likewise, I told the pump to run at 100% all the time. I don't need Asus going in and adjusting that and messing things up. So I'm really hesitant in installing that software. If it was just the graphics card, because it'd be nice. I remember eons ago when I think it was like GTX 10 Super Series launch, they launched one with more thermal sensors so you could see what the VRMs were doing. And it's kind of completely ironic that I'm looking at this and GPU, hotspot, thermal limit. That's it. There's no VRM temps here. And HDBY is usually pretty good with finding every single sensor in existence. I mean, those are drive capacities. There you go. I got temperatures on my hard drives. Some of these hard drives apparently have second sensor in there to determine what the external temperature is. The memory slots. I'm pretty sure the motherboard doesn't have sensors on the slots. This is the 4 DIMMs of memory, and each one has its own thermal sensor. I mean, but the graphics card has no clue what its VRM is doing. Ugh. So, I've been recording Ramble for about 30 minutes. I was expecting this to be a little bit shorter. Throw in some dancing at the 7th Hell Club afterwards to see how this is doing versus this, because the CPU is not pegged out. I'm probably forgetting other things. Yeah, at least it's not this bad. But there's only so much I was willing to cut away before looking down here. You can almost see the stuff behind there. You got to get to a certain angle. You look over the tops of the plugs and you can see back there. Tiny angle. Yeah. So this was before any modifications, and I was trying to figure out what cuts I could make. I wasn't able to get that notch cut out like that because on the end here, I'm cutting into this here to get the Dremel disc down to be able to cut along that edge. And if I did that here, I'd be going into that screw hole, so that wasn't an option. Yeah, ran out of daylight the first day. I'll leave a link to the doobly-doo for this, but there really isn't much for pictures other than a brief description of how to open up the card to this point, replace the paste, and not much else. Yeah, I don't know if there was I don't think it was Tech Power Up. I think it was just a picture from Reddit. It was the other one. Steady state before starting OBS. Oh. Close enough to 37.8. 38, 42. And then I got to do that to be able to see this for behind that. Or anything else? Comparison before, after. I mean, it has potential to breathe better, but yeah. So, I guess at this point, I'm just looking at pictures and trying to figure out what I didn't say. So I'm going to pause the video there. Sip some coffee and stare at this and try to figure out if there's anything else I want to say. Take two. As the first time I was doing this, I had the audio turned down on the wrong thing. But I can't think of anything else to add to all that other stuff about the card, other than I didn't notice while I was recording that the room temperature had creeped from 75 Fahrenheit up to 76, so that's, what, 23.88888888 forever to 24 or something like that Celsius. So I guess those temperatures were a little off. But hopefully it's not my voice that's decreased this time. Just the thing there. So all the settings are still low. As if it was a 1070 non-Ti that I was working with. Mostly because it's another thing to try to keep consistent. But, yeah. 150. And over here, in the menu it's pegged out, but that's because it's not rendering anything. It's just spitting stuff to the graphics card to render, and then in game it drops down. So yeah, CPU isn't pegged. There's like another video I probably won't post where I was here watching the CPU and trying to figure out if I should change this setting from what I had it set to before, and I guess I don't need to. I can enjoy my room not being a sauna, because these massive core CPUs, when they're in 3D Light or anything else that's pegging all the cores to 100% for hours on end, really pump out the heat. There was a few other things I was thinking of in the outro, but I think the gist of it is I have about maybe 4 or 5 minutes to enjoy here before that total video length is like 45 minutes long. So now the GPU's been fairly well pegged here. I'm not sure what this is. I don't know if this is including the RT cores that I'm not using or the tensor cores. I've yet to see it go past 98. But this right here isn't looking too different from, what was it, Unigine Haven or however, where it was indicating like 80 something here on the hotspot, but something was kicking a thermal limit down here. And then after doing the mod, I sat down and recorded a video of Haven running, and it was still doing that. So I think that might be, it just might be the 3060 design and not anything for this particular card. Could probably fix that with a water block, but I'm not going there. So, at this point, see if I move this to the other monitor, will it let me get to settings? If I find the mouse here. It will. Okay. So I'm gonna crank these up. Just to peg out the graphics card. I could do more, but does it really matter if I'm just looking at thermals? Okay, so 98. 97, so yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what to make of that. Also, the time it takes the card to warm up with the consistent load hasn't changed from the vents. I probably got to look at that heatsink and try to figure out if it's even possible to do something to open that up a little bit more, though I have significant doubts. I think that's folded metal, and there's just no way to make the blockage area smaller without disconnecting each individual fin from the next and ending up with like a reed or a tuning fork like setup with all the little pieces of metal sticking out and not braced by anything and just kind of flapping in the breeze to resonate and make all kinds of noise. This is also the point where I gotta go and watch that hardware unboxed video and figure out what settings I can crank up and which ones aren't worth it. Yeah, 81.8. Unigen even was kind of putting the temps there as well. And can I put that other thing on our screen? Just out of curiosity. Ah, yeah. So, yeah. This is... yeah. Hotspot, wherever it happens to be, because I guess that's like a roaming sensor and it reports whatever thermometer in the die is the hottest. Absolutely blowing past the 83 there. But again, that's the 3060 chip. That's not just an Asus dual thing. Oh. '60s, '70s. Better than the 1070. I could probably go check out a few other games, but I gotta go and finish doing some things and figure out what I have for play funds or if there's any this month. Yep. Open up the bracket on the back of the card so air could get out, and it's not really doing much, is the conclusion, I guess. It was fun to try it. Kinda sad it didn't do anything. So that, be cool, y'all.